My ex stole the strategy I created in our apartment at 2 a.m. He pitched it, got promoted, and acted like I never existed. So I sent our CEO the original voice recording, the one with my voice, explaining every single move. Hi, I'm Vanessa Leigh. I'm 34 years old, a senior business strategist at one of the largest tech firms in the country. I'm the type who color codes spreadsheets and wakes up at 4 a.m. with a new idea for improving a workflow diagram. I've always believed in structure, in systems, in giving people the benefit of the doubt, even when they don't deserve it. Before I dive in, let me ask for a quick favor. If you enjoy real-life stories about betrayal, justice, and strategic revenge, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. We're just getting started, and your support means everything as we grow this channel and bring more of these quietly explosive stories to life. Thank you. Now back to the beginning. Before the betrayal, before the recording, before I made a calm decision that changed everything. I met Darren in the company's innovation lab 3 years ago. We were both junior analysts back then, fueled by ambition and bottomless coffee. What started as a kind of rivalry, a race to outshine each other in presentations and pilot project ideas, quickly turned into collaboration, and collaboration turned into connection. We began working late together, throwing ideas around until our voices went hoarse. Somewhere between whiteboards and lukewarm Thai takeout, we fell in love. Or at least I did. Darren and I were each other's sounding board. Every strategy I thought up, he heard it first. Every framework he outlined, I helped him refine. Our connection was creative, electric, and I thought safe. We shared everything, or I shared everything. Then came the strategy project. It wasn't a formal assignment, just an idea I'd been workshopping quietly in my head. A long-term growth strategy that combined data-informed expansion with emotional brand loyalty. A hybrid model that could scale fast but feel human. One night, long after everyone else had gone home, I walked Darren through it. Charts, case studies, theoretical implementation, all of it. I even recorded myself talking through the plan to fine-tune how it sounded. I wanted to pitch it someday. I wanted to own it. He listened, nodded, smiled in that way people do when they see potential. "This is brilliant," he said. "You really think 5 moves ahead." I remember laughing, tossing a pen at him, saying, "Let's change the game together." But games end. Our relationship unraveled quietly a few months later. No explosive argument, just silence that grew until it was too heavy to carry. He moved out. We kept working at the same company, now in different departments. Our dynamic cooled to nothing more than awkward hallway nods and the occasional, "How have you been?" in passing. It stung, but I was still focused on my work, still developing that strategy, still refining it in private, saving it for the right moment. Then the company announced an internal promotion, Director of Strategic Innovation, a huge leap forward. I hesitated. Maybe I was still bruised from the breakup. Maybe I wasn't ready to put my name out there. Either way, I didn't apply. Darren did. I didn't think much of it. Not until I sat in on the leadership panel where candidates pitched their visions. I listened from the back of the room, arms crossed, more out of curiosity than concern. And then I heard it. Line after line, Darren began presenting a familiar idea, my strategy, my framework, my language. The phased implementation model, the segmentation by behavioral data. The phrase I used to describe our projected rollouts as an accordion of touchpoints that breathe customer insight, word for word. I stared at him from the back of that room and felt something fracture inside me. He didn't just remember what I said. He took it, packaged it, presented it as his own. And at that moment, I realized I still had the original recording. I couldn't focus for the rest of Darren's pitch. My chest felt tight, like I'd been punched but hadn't fully registered it yet. The kind of betrayal that isn't loud or messy, but cold, silent, calculated. I walked out before the applause started. I needed air. I remember standing by the building's loading dock, staring at my reflection in the tinted glass, wondering if I was overreacting, Maybe we'd just thought alike. Maybe he remembered bits of the plan subconsciously. But deep down, I knew better. I knew the difference between parallel thinking and plagiarism. Darren hadn't just borrowed the concept. He had taken the bones, the soul, and the story I'd built. The worst part, he delivered it well. Confident, smooth. The same charm he used on me, now redirected at the boardroom. And it worked. A week later, HR sent out the congratulatory email. Darren was the new director of strategic innovation. People clapped. My inbox flooded with messages. "Isn't that your ex? He must be brilliant to win that title. I bet you taught him a thing or two, huh?" I smiled, replied with polite emojis. Then I closed my laptop and sat in silence. Every detail in his proposal matched mine. Even the rollout schedule followed my original logic. The only thing missing was my name. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I was being petty. Maybe I should just move on. But the more I tried to talk myself out of the truth, the more it pressed on me. He had taken something I built from nothing, something I had dreamed up when I couldn't sleep, something I had nurtured with the kind of care only real creators understand, and used it as a springboard for his own success. And the man who once said, "Let's change it together," had done it alone, without acknowledgement, without permission. I avoided the strategy department for weeks, couldn't sit through his presentations, couldn't bear the way he quoted my metaphors like they were just catchy lines. Every time I saw his name on an internal memo, it felt like someone whispering he got away with it. Then one morning, I overheard two junior analysts in the break room. One said, "It's weird. Some of Darren's language sounds recycled, like too polished for someone who just got the role." The other replied, "Who knows? Maybe it wasn't all his idea to begin with." I didn't turn around. I didn't say anything, but something shifted in me. It wasn't just that Darren had taken my strategy. It was that he'd taken the recognition, the story, the innovation, the quiet hours I spent building a system I believed could transform our team's future. And now he was being praised for it while I sat in the shadows, biting my tongue. No more. I went home that night and found the old folder on my hard drive. The one labeled Growth Vision Draft. Inside it were my notes, my diagrams, and the voice recording. My voice walking through the model. Calm, clear, full of purpose. It was dated, time-stamped, clean, proof. I played it back, headphones in, heart racing. And as I heard myself say the words Darren had spoken to the board, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Clarity. He hadn't just crossed a line. He'd built his career on my shoulders and acted like the climb was his alone. I closed my laptop and sat still for a long time. I wasn't angry anymore. I was ready. In the days that followed, I became quiet, but not numb, just deliberate. I watched Darren from a distance, watched how easily he moved through the office, shaking hands, leading meetings, laughing too loud in the hallway like nothing had changed, like he hadn't erased me from my own story. I kept my tone neutral in meetings, smiled when I had to, nodded at the right times, but internally everything shifted. Every time someone congratulated him, it felt like another stitch being pulled from a wound I hadn't realized was still open. I started to withdraw, not in sadness, but in calculation. What bothered me most wasn't the betrayal itself. It was how easy it had been for him, how quickly I had become disposable in his ascent. He'd taken the most meaningful creative work I'd ever done, walked away with it, and assumed I'd stay silent. And for a time, I considered doing just that. Because part of me feared what speaking up would cost. I didn't want to be seen as bitter, or dramatic, or worse, unstable. I knew how that narrative played out, especially for women in corporate spaces. You raise your hand, and suddenly you're the problem. So I started keeping a journal. Each night, I wrote down what happened that day, the meetings where Darren referenced ideas I knew weren't his, the language he reused, the offhand comments from coworkers, I began documenting my memories when I had shared the plan with him, how I'd developed it when the recording was made. One night, I found myself back in the old apartment, picking up some mail that had still been routed there. As I stepped inside, everything looked smaller. That space where we used to brainstorm together now felt sterile, quiet. I sat on the floor in the corner where we used to sketch ideas on Post-its and whispered to the walls, "You know it was mine, right?" And then I cried, not because of him, but because I missed the version of me that still believed people like Darren wouldn't do what he did. There was one moment that changed everything for me. I had stayed late one evening, long after the office emptied. I went into the executive conference room where Darren had pitched his plan. I sat in the very seat he had used. I imagined him standing there, weaving my words into his confident performance. I stared at the screen that had projected my ideas, only no one in the room had known they were mine. Then I did something unexpected. I played the recording aloud. Not loud enough to be heard outside the room, just enough to fill the space. It was surreal, my voice echoing across the sleek wood panels and cold glass. My tone was calm, professional, hopeful. I sounded proud. I was proud. And hearing myself again, I realized something important. I didn't need to prove my worth. I already had. What I needed now was for the right people to hear it. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to blow things up. I wasn't going to call a meeting and air my grievances like a soap opera. I was going to do something more powerful. I was going to let the truth speak for itself. Silently, strategically, like I always had. And this time, I let it echo in the room where decisions get made. With the decision made, I shifted into quiet motion. I started by reviewing everything I had, meticulously. I needed not just to feel justified, but to be bulletproof. My career had been built on precision. This would be no different. I began compiling a timeline. First, the original draft files, all saved under my name, all created weeks, months, before Darren's panel pitch. Then came the voice recording. It was dated, unedited, and stored on both my hard drive and a cloud backup. That helped. Redundancy was my habit, and now it was my shield. I found old Slack messages between Darren and me from the night I first shared the idea. Nothing explicit, but enough to show we were brainstorming, enough to suggest collaboration, at least on the surface. But the recording, that was everything. I listened to it again late one night, jotting down timestamps where key phrases matched his public presentation. Accordion of touch points, dynamic segmentation logic, low latency rollout simulation. Each line he had delivered to the board was there, in my voice, long before he ever stood at that podium. It wasn't about catching him in a crime, it was about laying out the truth. Clearly, unemotionally, undeniably. I didn't want drama. I wanted clarity. The next part was harder, figuring out how to bring this forward. I couldn't just barge into an executive's office. That would raise red flags for the wrong reasons. I needed an angle, a moment that aligned with the business, not just my personal need for justice. That moment came during an internal call for proposals. Upper management wanted staff-wide input on how to structure the upcoming product launch. A sort of think tank pitch event with senior leadership invited to observe. That was my in. I submitted a revised proposal, not the exact same as the original one Darren had lifted, but a deeper, updated version. One that made the first look like a draft. More layers, better predictive models, cleaner segmentation logic. This time, I embedded it with intention. And I attached the audio, not as a gotcha moment. I added it in a supplemental file labeled Voice Notes, Initial Concept Recording, Internal Draft Use Only. Just like I used to do when we'd share project outlines. My goal wasn't to accuse, it was to remind. To reestablish authorship without noise. I marked the email confidential. I addressed it directly to the CEO and CC'd 2 other VPs. No commentary, no claims. Just the work. Just my voice. and then I waited. The silence was thick. 3 days passed, then 4. Then, on the 5th day, a calendar invite appeared in my inbox. Follow-up, strategy proposal review. CEO office. No subject line. Just a time, a location, and a very specific list of attendees. Darren was not one of them. The meeting was set for Thursday at 9:30 a.m. in the executive wing, one of those glass-walled rooms where the furniture looks expensive and the silence carries weight. I arrived 10 minutes early, not to look eager, but to breathe. I wore navy, sharp, structured, unassuming. My hair pulled back, my notes minimal. I didn't want flair, I wanted focus. The CEO, Margaret, entered first. She was quiet, reading something on her tablet. Then 2 VPs followed, operations and talent development. None of them looked at me with suspicion, just interest. That was a good sign. "Vanessa," Margaret said without preamble, "your supplemental file caught my attention." My throat tightened for a second, but I nodded. I thought it would help provide context. She leaned forward, folding her hands. I listened to the full recording. It was insightful, especially given some of the language I've heard in recent strategy briefings. I met her gaze, calm, controlled. I recorded it months ago. It was originally meant to be internal scaffolding, just my own planning notes. "No," she said, her tone clipped but not cold. It was more than that. It was fully formed, articulate, the kind of clarity we rarely see at the draft level. I didn't respond right away. Just let the silence settle between us. One of the VPs finally asked, "Why didn't you present it sooner?" I looked down for a beat, choosing my words carefully. I wasn't ready to step into the spotlight when the last opportunity opened up, but I've been developing the framework since then. I realized I'd rather lead with the work itself, not compete for attention. Margaret tilted her head. And yet someone else did. Her tone wasn't accusatory, just observational. That made it sting less and more. "There are overlaps," I acknowledged. Which is why I included the voice file. I thought it would speak for itself. She gave a small nod, almost to herself. Then she closed her tablet. "What you did," she said slowly, "was incredibly restrained. Most people would have gone straight to HR or caused a public disruption." "That's not how I work," I said simply. The meeting shifted then from investigation to curiosity. They asked me to walk them through the updates I'd made. I did calmly, explaining the refinements without a hint of vindication. It wasn't about Darren anymore. It was about the work, my work. And they listened. They didn't interrupt, didn't glance at their watches. They took notes. When the meeting ended, Margaret stood and looked me dead in the eye. "Thank you for trusting the process," she said, "and for reminding us where some of our best ideas really start." She left without another word. I stepped out of that glass room feeling lighter, not triumphant, just steady. I hadn't screamed, I hadn't begged, I hadn't exposed anyone by name. But they knew. I had planted the truth, and it had bloomed in silence. Later that day, I received another calendar invite, confidential, talent development conversation. I didn't need to open it to understand what it meant. The wheel had begun to turn. Darren didn't see it coming. That's what struck me most. In the days after my meeting with Margaret, the energy in the office shifted, subtle but undeniable. People stopped quoting Darren as much. His name wasn't being dropped in leadership chatter the way it had been. The momentum he'd been riding began to stall, softly, then noticeably. Then came the second panel review. It was meant to be a progress update for strategic initiatives, an open forum where all senior leaders would present ongoing results. I wasn't scheduled to speak, Darren was. But I was invited to attend. The room was full. I took a seat near the side, quiet, composed. Darren walked in late, holding his tablet like a shield. He looked confident, if a little thinner than usual. Maybe he'd felt it too, that sense that something was unraveling. He began his update with the same polish he'd always had. Clear slides, polished language. But his energy was off, tentative, like he was reading someone else's story and hoping no one would notice the misprint. Halfway through, Margaret raised a hand. "Darren," she said, voice calm, "can you clarify which version of the strategic rollout model you used in Phase 2? He hesitated. The hybrid segmentation structure I outlined in the original pitch." Margaret nodded. "And did you develop that model yourself?" There was a beat of silence. I could feel the weight of the room shift. "Yes," he said carefully. "With supporting input from my team, of course." Her expression didn't change. "Because we recently reviewed an early voice file from internal archives, dated several months before your pitch, that outlines the same structure in quite specific detail. Authored by someone else." Darren blinked. His hands froze. I'm not sure what file that refers to." It refers to Vanessa's original recording," she said. "We reviewed it last week." There was no explosion, no shouting, just silence. A full-bodied, suffocating silence. Darren glanced at me across the room. His eyes flickered, recognition, fear, a trace of shame. But I held his gaze. Calm, measured. I didn't smile, I didn't flinch. I simply looked back, steady and quiet. Margaret closed her folder. "We'll be reevaluating the leadership alignment in that department." She didn't need to say anything more. After the meeting, Darren didn't approach me. He avoided eye contact, ducked out quickly. The next day, a notice went out. He was stepping down to explore new opportunities. No fanfare, no goodbye lunch, just gone. And in his absence, an invitation arrived in my inbox. Interim Strategic Lead Proposal Review with CEO. It wasn't revenge, it was restoration. When the announcement hit that Darren had stepped down, no one asked too many questions. In corporate culture, people learn to read between the lines, especially when the departure is quiet and the replacement process is already in motion. What surprised me most wasn't that he left. It was how quickly the air cleared after he did. Like a tension no one had acknowledged finally released. People started coming to me, not dramatically, not in droves, but slowly, in one-on-one moments. "Hey, I heard you were behind some of the core strategy." I always wondered where those models came from. Honestly, it makes more sense now. There was no parade, no fireworks, but I didn't want them. What I wanted was what I was getting. Acknowledgement, clarity, and the chance to lead on my own terms. Margaret called me in for a final follow-up. "We're restructuring the strategic division," she said, "and I'd like you to take a lead consultant role working directly with my office for the next quarter." I didn't blink. I didn't defer. I said yes. I didn't want Darren's job. I wanted mine. Elevated, untangled from his shadow, and rooted in my own voice. Over the next few weeks, I redesigned the rollout plan, expanded the team's scope, and began mentoring the junior analysts who not long ago had whispered doubts in the break room. They were sharp, and they watched me closely, not just for what I said, but how I moved. Grace, precision, restraint. That was the legacy I was building now. As for Darren, I never heard from him again. No message, no apology. But I didn't need one. Some stories don't end with confrontation. They end with distance, and the peace that comes from knowing you acted with clarity, not chaos. I changed desks after the promotion, not because I had to, but because I wanted a new view. My new office overlooks the side courtyard, where the cherry trees bloom in spring. It's quieter here, fewer footsteps, fewer eyes, more space to think. I kept the original voice recording, but I never played it again. It sits in a folder labeled Truth, next to the final strategy deck that bears only my name. Not because I needed a trophy, but because I wanted a reminder that it was always mine. Some nights I stay late, like I used to. Only now, it's not about proving anything. It's about shaping what comes next. My ideas aren't whispered in hallways anymore. They're documented, presented, credited. I've earned that space. I also started mentoring women in the company, quiet ones like me. Smart, capable women who sometimes hesitate to speak until everything's perfect. I tell them what I wish someone had told me sooner. You don't need to be louder. You just need to be clear. Your work will speak if you let it. One of them asked me recently, how did you stay so calm when someone stole from you? I smiled. Because I knew, I said, that the most powerful retaliation is letting the truth echo where it matters most. That's what this story was really about. Not revenge for revenge's sake, but clarity, restoration, precision. I didn't win because I shouted the loudest. I won because I waited, because I listened. Because I knew what was mine, and eventually so did everyone else.